NATO headquarters. A little while ago, I concluded the first of our regular meetings this year with the 30 NATO Chiefs of Defense and SecUr and SecT attending. We will hold 2 others this year in May and September. While this initial meeting was planned to be in person, the rolling waves of COVID-19 across the world pushed us to switch to a virtual format. While the format may change, our aim does not. These meetings provide an opportunity for NATO's highest NATO military authority to come together, to assess the current security situation, discuss ongoing work strands, and reflect on future requirements. For almost 73 years, NATO has remained the strongest military alliance in the world through its ability to adapt, expect the unexpected, and prepare for it. In today's security climate, NATO is facing the most complex set of challenges in a generation. Russia is more aggressive abroad and more oppressive at home. Yesterday, the NATO Secretary General hosted a NATO-Russia Council for the first time since 2019, and I attended the meeting in person. As the Secretary General stated in his press conference, this was not an easy discussion, but all the more important. There are significant differences between NATO allies and Russia, while our differences will not be easy to bridge. It is a positive sign that all NATO allies and Russia sat down around the same table and engaged on substantive topics. This is an opportunity for constructive engagement, which should not be missed in the interest of security in Europe. Meanwhile, across the world, China is using its economic and military might to control its own people, coerce other countries, assert control over global supply chains, critical infrastructure, and other assets. We face more frequent and sophisticated cyber and hybrid attacks, targeting crucial infrastructures like hospitals or law enforcement. Terrorism threatens the safety of our nations and citizens. Adversaries are developing and testing hypersonic glide vehicles and intercontinental ballistic missiles. We are seeing the weaponization of emerging and disruptive technologies and the instrumentalization of migration. The security impact of climate change also looms over us. These are truly global challenges, and the distinct phases of peace, crisis and war are becoming increasingly blurred. All of this has consequences for our security, consequences that no nation, no continent can face alone. But in NATO, we are not alone. Together, we represent 30 nations with half of the world's military might, protecting almost 1 billion citizens. We are also witnessing an unprecedented level of unity and cohesion in our alliance, on both the political and military sides. 30 NATO Chiefs of Defense speaking in unison and acknowledging the requirement for NATO to be better prepared. NATO has been constantly adapting to be able to fulfill its 3 core tasks, and they are cooperative security, collective defense, and crisis management, across all domains, being land, air, maritime, space, and cyber. Over the past years, we have undertaken our biggest adaptation in a generation. We have also taken decisive action to strengthen our collective defense. Now, we must look to the future by further protecting our values, reinforcing our military power, strengthening our societies, taking a global outlook, and building NATO as the institutional link between Europe and North America. These 5 points should be addressed in the new strategic concept to ensure it reflects new and future challenges. And that's exactly why we dedicated our first afternoon of meetings, to our strategic military thinking. Together with SecT and Secure, the 30 Allied Chiefs of Defense discussed our military advice for the new strategic concept as well as the risks and opportunities facing the alliance. The Chiefs of Defense agreed that while our current military strategy is working, it might eventually need to be revised in light of the new strategic concept. They were then briefed on the implementation of NATO's war-fighting capstone concept, as well as the progress on the concept for the deterrence and defense of the Euro-Atlantic area. The concept for deterrence and defense of the Euro-Atlantic area, developed by the Supreme Allied Commander Europe, focuses on military requirements we need to deter and defend today. The NATO war-fighting capstone concept, developed by our Supreme Allied Commander Transformation, offers a vision to remain militarily strong in the future. Both concepts will help set NATO's military priorities and approach to current and future threats. The NATO Chiefs of Defense also looked at improving future force generation. While the core procedures for nations to contribute troops and equipment to NATO have remained the same, over the years, the force generation process has been refined to reflect changes in the types of operations and missions that NATO conducts. Today, NATO military planners are looking beyond immediate needs, allowing both the alliance and troop-contributing countries to plan their resources better. The goal is to better understand the relationships at play in order to achieve fairer and more realistic burden sharing during NATO-led operations and missions, but also to ensure that NATO missions and operations are properly resourced to contribute and ultimately achieve their objectives. Next week, General Walters will hold a force generation conference. As NATO has no troops of its own, it falls to nations to provide the personnel and capabilities to ensure we have the right forces in the right place at the right time. And just to be clear, we are looking to do things better and, if necessary, to do more. The Chiefs of Defense also considered how to further enable the NATO command structure and the force structure to deliver on NATO's three core tasks in this digital age. Success in the future operating environment will depend on harnessing information to connect forces through command, control, communication and information. With more and more data, the advantage will lie with whomever will collect the most vital data, store it, extract and analyze the relevant information, and ultimately distribute it to our commanders. Commanders at sea, on land, in the air, and to those working in the cyber and space domains. At NATO, we are acutely aware of the challenges and opportunities offered by data superiority. And we are actively engaged in a digital transformation of our ways of working, our equipment, and our human resources. Finally, the Chiefs of Defense discussed how to increase the speed of military decision-making to support political decisions. Over the last decades, NATO has been focusing more on crisis management. However, in recent years we have had to shift back to collective defense, and therefore it is vital to maximize preparation time for the military by ensuring that political decisions can be made at the speed of relevance. In crisis management, we were often involved in asymmetric warfare, whereas in collective defense, we are dealing with a near-peer or even peer adversary. The timelines for collective defense are very different from those for crisis management. This makes a common situational awareness for the strategic, political and military levels and faster digital decision-making systems and procedures all the more important. Improving our ability to understand better, decide faster, and be stronger together is critical for our relevance and for maintaining our status as the most successful military alliance in history. and above all, remaining capable of providing security and protection to our almost 1 billion people. We took this further on our second day by focusing on NATO's 360 degrees deterrence and defense posture. Since 2014, we have implemented the largest reinforcement of our collective defense in a generation, enhancing our ability to defend all allies on land, at sea, in the air, in cyberspace, and in space. This adaptation continues, and NATO is stepping up in response to the threats and challenges of today and tomorrow. We will continue to improve the readiness of our forces and to strengthen and modernize the NATO force structure to meet current and future needs. We also met with our Georgian and Ukrainian partners, respectively, to discuss the security situation in their nations as well as the ongoing progress with defense-related reforms. In our session with the Ukrainian Chief of Defense, the Allied Chiefs of Defense acknowledged the significant advances in reforms made by the Ukrainian armed forces, despite facing significant challenges. Alongside ensuring their own security, the Ukrainian military have been able to improve the capabilities of their special operations forces, set up a logistic forces command, and continue to implement NATO standards. We encouraged them to remain fully committed to the wide-ranging reforms of their armed forces, which will allow them to further build security and developments for all Ukrainians. And they will continue to have NATO's full support in this ambitious reform program, as well as our assistance to strengthen their capabilities and resilience to cyber and hybrid attacks. With similar security challenges, Georgia has also carried out impressive reforms while enhancing its defense capabilities through the substantial NATO-Georgia package. This package was enhanced to improve the interaction between Georgia and the different parts of its command structure, strengthen its maritime component, and focus more on resilience. Both partners are benefiting from unprecedented support and assistance from NATO. We want to ensure they have all the necessary tools to not only ensure their own security, but also further contribute to European security. Finally, in both sessions, we reiterated NATO's unwavering support for Ukraine's and Georgia's territorial integrity and sovereignty. The meetings held over the last 2 days have provided the necessary guidance to take our work forward in the coming months. We will reconvene in May to take stock of our progress ahead of the NATO summit in Madrid. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And now we will take some of your questions, and we will start with Terry Schultz from NPR Deutsche Welle. Terry, over to you.
Hello. Hi, Admiral Bauer. Thanks for doing this. I wanted to know, sort of to start off, how much the last week of super diplomatic talks with Russia has factored into your military planning there. Do you think at this moment that all the meetings with Moscow has made an invasion of Ukraine less likely or more likely? Have you seen anything from the Russian behavior that would encourage you that they do plan to move forward in dialogue instead of to continue increasing their military buildup? And I also wanted to know, I mean, some of the suggestions that I've heard would be that allies may unilaterally place more equipment and possibly increase training with Ukrainians as a form of deterrence. Is this something that you would approve of and possibly hope to coordinate there at SHAPE? Thanks.
First of all, Terry, good to see you again. But I think it is too early to say what the outcome of the meeting is, because the overall expectation is that the Russian government is conducting all the different talks. So there was the bilateral talks in Geneva, then the NATO-Russia Council here in Brussels, and today the OSCE meeting in Vienna. And most likely after those 3 meetings, they will reconvene in Moscow, most likely debrief President Putin, and then he will decide on the way forward. In terms of what we see at the borders of Ukraine, the meetings themselves in the last couple of days have not led to any large changes in the intelligence picture that we see. But the buildup over time, and it all started in the spring of 2020, the spring of 2021, and basically continued in the fall up to this moment, is still very concerning. Then with regards to your question about assistance from individual allies, it is actually what you say, it is assistance from individual allies. And that is not coordinated by NATO. There are certain programs that are part of the cooperation between Ukraine and NATO. But other than that, when it comes to other programs and assistance in terms of capabilities, that is the choice and the execution by the individual nations that have those bilateral contacts with Ukraine.
For the next question, we go to Paul McCleary from Politico. Paul, over to you.
Hi, Admiral. Good to see you again. When it comes to some of the frontline states, like in the Baltics and Poland, what can NATO do to increase their capabilities, offensive or defensive, in the near term as Russia continues their buildup near the Ukrainian border?
The Baltic states are, of course, that's the big difference with Ukraine, are a member of NATO. So that's the so in terms of the defense of the Baltic states, we're talking Article 5 if anything would happen to them in terms of an invasion. And I would say that is very important because in accordance with Article 5, we have committed ourselves to defend all the allies, and an attack on one is an attack on all. So I think that is very important. Secondly, the different enhanced forward presence battle groups is also a very important mechanism to make sure that basically all the allies are in the 3 Baltic states, or most of the allies are in the 3 Baltic states and in Poland. And although the number is relatively small, we're talking about in total about 5,000 troops, the strategic importance is extremely important. It means that when Russia would do anything in the 3 Baltic states or Poland, they would basically step on the toes of all the allies. And that in itself is not a military reason not to do it for the Russians, but it's an extremely important strategic advantage for us and especially for the Baltic states and Poland. So that is what it does for us, the enhanced forward present multinational battle groups. And then, of course, there's exercises in those nations. Then there is the decisions of the nations themselves when it comes to maybe improvements on capabilities in their own armed forces. That is part of discussions and, of course, choices within those nations to be decided by them. So it's a combination of all those things that will basically increasingly help them to be better prepared. And the different things I was talking about in terms of the DDA and the NWCC and all the discussions on the further planning down the road also involves, of course, the Baltic states and Poland because they are a member of NATO.
Gary Ronaldo from the Diplomatic Times is the next. Gary, over to you.
Good evening, Admiral Bauer. I want to shift to another region, the African region. With the NATO troops pulling out of Afghanistan, does NATO have any plans to help out with France, the counter operation in the Sahel region? Thank you.
For now, that is not a NATO operation. For now, that is a discussion between France and a number of allies. So it could very well be that a number of allies will get involved in those operations, but for now that is not, I don't foresee a NATO operation in that region.
And for the next one, we go to Alina Buhayeva from the public broadcast company from the Ukraine. Over to you.
Hello, Alina Buhayeva, Ukrainian Public Broadcasting Company. What are the world threats are the most priority for NATO, and how NATO will respond on these threats? Thank you.
Sorry, I might have misheard you. What are the worst threats for NATO? Militarily, you mean?
Yes.
Okay. I would say there's at the moment, in terms of what NATO has to be able to do, is to deter and defend itself, of course, from any possible threat. But the two things that NATO is now primarily looking at is Russia and terrorism. So those are the terrorist groups. That's the two main areas where we are looking at. And so basically, when it comes to deterring, means that you are able to convince the other party that the consequences of any action against us would be worse for that other party than for us. And that means that you have to be strong, but also credible. So it's not only that you have the capabilities and that you have the troops, but that the other party is convinced that you will be able to use it properly. So that requires training, but also that you have the will to actually use it when it comes to it. So those are the elements that are very important for deterrence. And then, of course, once it happens, when there is an incursion, when there is something that requires defending our territory, then you need to be able to use those capabilities, those people and the forces in a proper way to be effective. So those are the two elements, and it comprises basically all the elements of which both the Russian armed forces and the terrorist groups, all the capabilities that they have.
For the next question, we go to Marta Wilenska from Radar TV. We know that you don't have a camera, but hopefully we can hear you. Marta, over to you. No sound, Marta. Can you switch on your sound, please? Okay, haven't heard anything. So then we go to Mattia Bagnoli from ANSA. Mattia, over to you. Mattia, we can't hear you. Then finally, we try with Indio Monchili.
Good afternoon. I have two questions. First one, yesterday the Estonian Prime Minister Kaja Kallas said that the Baltic states want more NATO military presence due to the Russian threat to Ukraine. So I would ask, has such idea, has some such proposal or similar proposal come from some of the Southeastern Europe flank member states, I mean Romania, Bulgaria, or Turkey? And second question, today the Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Ryabkov said that Russia can deploy missiles in Cuba and Venezuela due to the unwillingness of NATO to make some concessions. Well, do you have comment on that? Thank you.
First, I think when it comes to the request of additional forces, NATO forces in nations, it was the Secretary General who said that if Russia would invade Ukraine, we will have to look at our posture, and that means that most. And he talked about Eastern Europe. So I think that is one of the things that we will have to look at once the Russians would invade Ukraine, and I know there is a number of nations that are interested in then hosting those forces, but as far as I know, that has not been made official yet. So I can't say in terms of that there is a decision. But in general, we are looking at the possibilities, and of course are what we call force sensing. So we look whether there is nations that are willing then to provide forces like they do in the EFP battle groups in the northeast. So that is in terms of that's preparations, but there is no decision yet. Secondly, on the missiles in Venezuela and Cuba, I haven't seen that message, so I don't actually understand exactly what the missiles would be, and so it's not sufficient for me to give you a military answer. But of course, that is of concern if Russia would bring missiles to other states that could have an impact on the security. It's not NATO territory if we're looking at Venezuela and Cuba, but I can imagine that there's nations, allies, that are concerned then about such a move.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. This ends the press conference. Have a good evening.